How much of what we call value is actually real, and how much of it is something we have collectively agreed to believe? I ask you that question because it sits at the center of Guy de Maupassant's short story, The Necklace. And if we reduce this story to a tidy moral about greed or gratitude, then we miss almost everything that makes it powerful. You'll recall that in this story, Matilda Loisel is a dissatisfied, lower middle class woman who borrows what she believes is an expensive diamond necklace for an elite ball, loses it, replaces it at enormous financial cost, spends 10 years in poverty paying off the debt, and then discovers the original necklace was a fake all along. But literature is not meant to be consumed at the level of plot. Plot is just the surface, but interpretation is the real work. If we only ask what happened, we stay shallow. But if we do real critical thinking, then we ask why it matters and what the story is exposing about power, identity, and social value. And so something that seemed simple suddenly becomes deeply unsettling. So let's critically think about what the necklace is actually doing. When I teach this story, most students immediately blame Matilda. They describe her as spoiled, shallow, ungrateful, selfish, and they argue that she receives exactly what she deserves. They say she wanted too much, she should have just appreciated her modest life, and she should have lived within her means. And yet, the moment we return to the very first paragraph of the story and read it carefully, that confident judgment begins to fracture. In fact, Maupassant doesn't introduce her as Matilda Loisel. He introduces her as she was one of those pretty and charming girls born as though fate had blundered over her into a family of artisans. That opening does significant work. By beginning with she rather than her proper name, Maupassant universalizes her. Matilda isn't immediately framed as an individual anomaly, but as representative of a broader social pattern. Moreover, the phrase "as though fate had blundered" suggests that her dissatisfaction is not merely personal arrogance, but that it's rooted in misplacement within a rigid social hierarchy. Then comes one of the most revealing lines in the entire story. Women have no caste or class, their beauty, grace, and charm serving them for birth or family. Their delicacy and elegance are their only mark of rank. That statement, which comes from the narrator rather than from Matilda herself, lays out the structural conditions of her world. Men inherit status through profession, lineage, and economic power. Women, by contrast, are told that their worth is aesthetic, that their social mobility depends upon how well they perform beauty and refinement. And if you think about it, that's pretty unfair and demeaning to women at large. So if that's the system, then Matilda's longing becomes far more complex than simple vanity. She has internalized the belief that elegance is currency. She believes, because her culture has told her so, that beauty and display are pathways to dignity and recognition. When she feels tormented by the mean walls, worn chairs, and ugly curtains of her home, she's not merely expressing petty dissatisfaction. She experiences her surroundings as an insult because they deny her the opportunity to convert her culturally valued traits into social power. In other words, Matilda doesn't invent the standards by which she judges herself. She inherits them. This is why the ball matters so much. It's not simply a glamorous setting. It's a stage upon which social ranking is performed and confirmed. It's a space designed for visibility, comparison, and judgment. Matilda understands that without the correct clothing and jewelry, she will be marked as inferior the moment she enters. I'll argue then that her anxiety about what she'll wear is therefore not trivial. It's an acute awareness of how identity is read in public spaces. When she borrows the necklace from Madame Forestier and looks at herself in the mirror, remaining in ecstasy at the sight of her reflection, she's not simply admiring an object. She's witnessing the alignment of self-image and social expectation. The necklace functions as symbolic capital. It signals wealth and belonging, and it translates into the language of elite society. And at the ball, that translation works. She becomes the most admired woman at the ball. Men desire her, and women envy her. For one night, then, the system that measures women by appearance rewards her. But the necklace is fake. This small detail shifts the entire story from moral anecdote to social critique. The necklace possesses no intrinsic value, and yet it produces real admiration, real envy, real elevation and status. No one questions its authenticity or demands verification. The guests respond to its appearance. It functions as valuable because it seems valuable, because everyone agrees to treat it as such. Maupassant is exposing how fragile and constructed social value can be. Diamonds are precious simply because we've collectively decided they're precious. Status exists because others recognize it. Appearances, when accepted as real, operate as real. The tragedy unfolds not because the necklace is fake, but because an entire life becomes reorganized around maintaining an illusion that society has taught everyone to respect. Now, let us reconsider blame in this broader context. Matilda certainly makes decisions. She loses the necklace, she agrees to lie, she allows pride to override honesty. However, her husband is deeply involved in every major step of the catastrophe. He presents the invitation, offers her money for a dress, suggests borrowing jewelry, proposes the lie about the broken clasp, negotiates the loans, and mortgages their existence. Even if he appears kind and well-intentioned, he participates fully in the culture of appearance that drives the disaster. His structural authority over finances further complicates the narrative of Matilda as sole culprit. Madame Forestier, too, is implicated. When Matilda's hands tremble and her heart beats covetously at the sight of the necklace, Madame Forestier does not clarify that it's imitation jewelry. She allows the aura of value to remain intact. Whether out of habit, indifference, or comfort with performance, she sustains the illusion. The final irony, when she doesn't recognize Matilda after 10 years of labor, underscores how thoroughly identity in the society is tied to surface appearance. The decade of poverty that follows is particularly revealing. During those 10 years, Matilda becomes disciplined, resilient, and capable. She learns to negotiate with shopkeepers, scrub floors, endure physical hardship. Ironically, she develops traits we typically associate with moral depth. Yet those traits don't restore her social standing. Instead, she loses the youth and beauty that once served as her mark of rank. When Madame Forestier fails to recognize her, the story reveals the cruelty of a system that renders women visible only when they are ornamental. I want to push this even further because the more time we spend with the story, the more it begins to function less as a cautionary tale and more as a diagnostic tool. It diagnoses something about how human beings respond to systems that define worth externally. Consider the psychological dimension of Matilda's transformation at the ball. For one evening, she experiences reflected identity. She becomes who others tell her she is. The admiration doesn't merely please her, it reshapes her sense of self. That moment forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. How much of our identity is internally grounded, and how much of it is constructed through the gaze of others? If Matilda feels fully alive only when she's admired, then the tragedy is not simply that she loses the necklace. The tragedy is that her sense of worth was never internally secure to begin with. Does that sound familiar to you in this day and age? Furthermore, if a society repeatedly tells women that their value lies in beauty and desirability, what happens when those qualities inevitably change? Maupassant's ending is merciless because it refuses to romanticize resilience, effort, and hard work. Matilda becomes stronger, sure, but strength is not what her world rewards in her. The system has no category for a woman who is valuable beyond appearance. Now, that structural indifference is far more disturbing than any individual flaw. We should also interrogate the economic dimension closely. The Loisels trade 10 years of their life for an object whose value was solely symbolic. This exchange invites us to consider how often individuals sacrifice years of stability, health, or peace of mind just to maintain an image. How often do people incur debt, financial or emotional, to preserve appearances? This story critiques not only gender norms, but also a culture of aspirational consumption in which objects promise access to identity. The lie itself reveals something equally profound. When the necklace is lost, Matilda and her husband choose concealment over confession because shame feels unbearable. The fear of social humiliation outweighs the fear of long-term hardship. That choice raises a difficult question. What are we willing to endure privately in order to avoid embarrassment publicly? How much of human behavior is governed by the desire just to protect an image? The final revelation that the necklace was imitation jewelry intensifies this critique. Matilda's suffering was unnecessary in material terms, yet it was entirely real in lived experience. The illusion, once internalized, produced irreversible consequences. In this way, Maupassant shows us that socially constructed values can have devastatingly concrete effects. Now, when we bring this into our own world, its relevance is undeniable. We live in an era saturated with curated identities, luxury aesthetics, replicas, filters, and AI capable of generating convincing images and personas. It has never been easier to project success, wealth, beauty, or expertise through carefully managed presentation. Social platforms reward polish and visibility. And in such an environment, the line between authentic and constructed blurs significantly. So the necklace feels almost prophetic. It demonstrates how easily perception can override substance and how costly it can be when identity becomes anchored in external validation. Just as Matilda believes she must look the part in order to belong, many people today feel pressure to curate their lives in ways that signal legitimacy. The ball has expanded into a constant stage, and the anxiety of performance has intensified significantly. And this is why, to me anyway, the necklace endures. It captures the fragile architecture of value in any society that prioritizes surfaces, and it invites us to question how we define worth, how we judge others, and how easily we internalize standards that may ultimately harm us. So I want to leave you with a few questions that extend far beyond the classroom. When you think about your ambitions, how much of them are rooted in internal fulfillment and how much are shaped by external validation? What serves as the necklace in your own life, the symbol you believe will finally make you legitimate? When you encounter polished images of others, do you interrogate their substance or do you accept the appearance as proof? And if the necklace were revealed to be fake, metaphorically speaking, of course, what in your life would remain solid? Now, this is what literature does at its best. It unsettles easy morals and compels us to examine ourselves. It reminds us that stories are not distant artifacts, but mirrors of enduring human tension. When we read carefully, we are not merely analyzing characters on a page, we are reflecting on the structure shaping our own desires. If this discussion has expanded your understanding of this story, literature, or critical thinking in general, I encourage you to explore my many other lectures available here on YouTube and TikTok, where I examine canonical texts in ways that connect them meaningfully to contemporary life. Because ultimately, we read literature not to memorize plot, but to recognize ourselves. We read to uncover the systems that influence our thinking, to question inherited standards, and to develop the awareness necessary to live thoughtfully within our own cultural moment. For me, then, the necklace is not simply about a woman and a jewel. It is about the fragile agreements that define value, the pressures that shape identity, and the consequences of confusing appearance with essence. Once you see that, the story stops being simple and really it becomes the unforgettable classic that it is meant to be. Thank you so much for joining me here today, spending a few minutes of your time with me. I really appreciate it, and I do look forward to continuing this conversation and more in the next lectures. Be well.